David Reid stood frozen in the doorway, his hand still gripping the handle. The woman across the room turned slowly, her silk blouse half-buttoned, eyes meeting him with a mixture of surprise and something else he couldn't name. What happens when one wrong door changes everything you thought you knew about your life? Before we continue, hit subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. David Reid, 42, single father, night janitor at Wright Industries, moved through the 37th floor like a ghost. His footsteps were practiced, silent. He'd learned early that invisibility was a survival skill in corporate towers, where men in suits decided your worth before learning your name. The keycard in his pocket felt heavier than it should. 5 years of cleaning these halls. 5 years of overtime shifts that paid for Dolly's asthma medication. 5 years of becoming furniture in a world that glittered just beyond his reach. His daughter's face floated through his mind as he pushed the cleaning cart down the executive corridor. Dolly, 9 years old, whip-smart with her mother's auburn hair and a laugh that could break through his darkest moments. She was home now with Mrs. Kate from 4B, probably finishing homework at the kitchen table that wobbled because he hadn't found time to fix it. David checked his watch. 11:47 p.m. The executive floor was supposed to be empty by 10. That was the rule. Executives didn't work this late. Not on Thursdays. Not during quarterly review week, when everyone pretended to care about work-life balance. He approached the corner office suite, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city like a throne room. Vivian Wright's domain. CEO, majority shareholder, the woman whose signature appeared on his paychecks and whose face graced Forbes covers with headlines about disruption and vision. He'd seen her exactly 3 times in 5 years. Once in the lobby, twice in elevators. She'd never looked at him. Not really. He was part of the infrastructure, like the HVAC system or the security cameras blinking red in corners. The door to her private changing room stood slightly ajar. David frowned. Protocol dictated that all doors remain closed after hours, locked from the inside if an executive was working late. Open doors meant empty rooms, meant go ahead and clean. He knocked anyway. Twice, firm but not aggressive. Nothing. He waited 10 seconds, then pushed the door open. And there she was. Vivian Wright stood before a full-length mirror, her tailored blazer draped over a nearby chair, her blouse unbuttoned halfway down. But it wasn't the state of her clothing that stopped David cold. It was the massive scar that ran from her collarbone down across her ribs, angry and raised, the kind that told stories of survival, not vanity. She turned, not with the sharp embarrassment he expected, but with a weariness that seemed to age her 10 years in an instant. Their eyes locked. Neither spoke. The moment stretched, thin and fragile, until David stepped back, hand raised in apology. But before he could retreat fully, Vivian spoke, her voice quieter than he'd ever imagined it could be. "Close the door behind you." He hesitated. "Please," she added. And that single word carried a weight that made him obey. The door clicked shut. David stood with his back against it, eyes respectfully averted. She finished buttoning her blouse with practiced efficiency, tucking it into her skirt with movements that spoke of routine, of armor being reassembled piece by piece. "You're David," she said. Not a question. He blinked. "Yes, ma'am." "You have a daughter, Dolly, 9 years old. Asthma." His throat tightened. How did she know? Vivian reached for her blazer, slipping it on with the same careful precision. "I know the names of everyone who works past midnight in this building. I know whose children are sick, whose parents need care, whose student loans are crushing them." She turned to face him fully now, composed, the CEO mask sliding back into place. "What I don't know is why you knocked." David swallowed. "It's what you do, before entering someone's space. Most people in your position wouldn't bother. I'm not most people." Something flickered across her face. Recognition, perhaps. Or curiosity. "No," she said softly. "I suppose you're not." She walked past him, close enough that he caught the scent of expensive perfume mixed with something earthier, like fear or exhaustion. At the door, she paused, one hand on the frame. "This conversation never happened," she said. "Understood." David nodded. But as she walked away, heels clicking down the marble corridor, he couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted, like a single note played in a silent room, waiting to see what harmony might follow. What David didn't know was that this moment, this accidental breach of boundaries, would unravel secrets that reached far deeper than a CEO's hidden scar. 3 days passed. David moved through his shifts with mechanical efficiency, scrubbing floors and emptying trash bins while replaying that night in his mind. The scar, the weariness, the way she'd known his daughter's name. It haunted him in the spaces between tasks. On Monday, an envelope appeared in his locker. Crisp white paper, no return address, sealed with red wax like something from another century. Inside, a handwritten note on company letterhead. "My private office. Tuesday, 11 p.m. Come alone. Vich." David stood in the break room, the note trembling slightly in his calloused hands. Around him, other janitors laughed over microwaved dinners, oblivious. His friend Diego clapped him on the shoulder. "You okay, man? You look like you've seen a ghost." David folded the note carefully. "Yeah, just tired." But exhaustion wasn't what kept him awake that night after his shift ended, and he returned to his small 2-bedroom apartment, where Dolly slept soundly, her inhaler on the nightstand, next to a drawing she'd made of the two of them holding hands under a sun with a smiley face. He sat at the kitchen table, the note spread before him like evidence of a crime he hadn't committed. What did she want? Was this about the scar, about him seeing something he shouldn't have? Was he being fired, quietly, the way corporations disposed of inconvenient witnesses? He thought about Dolly's medication, the rent due in 12 days, the car that needed new brakes he couldn't afford. He had no choice but to go. Tuesday arrived with cruel slowness. David moved through his shift in a fog, avoiding Diego's concerned glances, missing spots on windows, leaving trash bins half-emptied. At 10:58 p.m., he stood outside Vivian Wright's office. The door was unlocked. Inside, she sat behind her desk, not in her usual power suits, but in dark jeans and a simple black sweater. Her hair fell loose around her shoulders. She looked younger, more vulnerable, and infinitely more dangerous. "Sit," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. David sat, spine straight, waiting. Vivian studied him for a long moment. "I'm going to tell you something that could destroy me," she said finally. "And then I'm going to ask you to help me." David said nothing. "That scar you saw," she continued, her voice steady but quiet. "It's from a surgery I had 4 years ago. I donated part of my liver to save someone's life." She opened a drawer, pulled out a manila folder, and slid it across the desk. David opened it slowly. Inside were medical records, photos of a teenage girl, thin and pale, hooked to machines in a hospital bed. "Her name is Sophie. She's 17 now. My daughter." David looked up sharply. Vivian's expression remained neutral, but her hands gripped the edge of the desk. "No one knows she exists. Not the board, not the press, not the shareholders who think I'm some kind of corporate machine without a personal life. I built this company from nothing while raising her alone, and I've kept her hidden because the moment they know I have a weakness, they'll use her to control me." "Why are you telling me this?" David asked, his voice rougher than intended. "Because you knocked," Vivian said simply. "Because you gave me dignity when you could have just stared or gossiped or used what you saw against me. Because I've watched you for 5 years, David Reid, and I know what kind of man you are. She leaned forward. Sophie is sick again. Different complications. The surgery bought us time, but not enough. She needs round-the-clock care, and I can't be there. I have board meetings, investor calls, acquisitions that will collapse if I show weakness. I need someone I can trust to stay with her during the day while I pretend to be the heartless CEO the world expects. David felt the weight of her words settling on his shoulders. You want me to be her caregiver? I want you to be her friend, Vivian corrected. Someone real in a world that's suffocating her. I'll pay you triple your current salary, cover Dolly's medical expenses, set up a trust for her education. All I ask is discretion and kindness. David thought of Dolly, of the trust fund that could mean art school or college or whatever dreams she dared to have. He thought of Sophie, 17 and sick, hidden away like a secret shame. When do I start? Vivian exhaled, something like relief flooding her features. Tomorrow. As David stood to leave, she called after him. David, thank you for knocking. He nodded once and walked into the night, unaware that the real challenge wasn't caring for Sophie or keeping secrets. It was the truth about why Vivian had really chosen him, a truth buried so deep that even she didn't fully understand it yet, and when it finally surfaced, it would shatter everything they thought they knew about loyalty, sacrifice, and the dangerous borders between duty and love. Sophie Wright lived in a penthouse that felt more like a museum than a home. White walls, minimalist furniture, and art hanging in frames that seemed to forbid touching. She sat in a wheelchair by the window when he arrived that first morning, her back to the door, staring out at the city below. 17, thin as paper, with her mother's sharp cheekbones and eyes that had seen too much too soon. You're the janitor, she said without turning around. David set down his bag. David. And you're Sophie. The sick girl. Her voice carried no self-pity, just statement of fact. The girl, David corrected gently. She turned then, sizing him up with an intelligence that reminded him uncomfortably of Vivian. Mom says you have a daughter, Dolly. I do. Is she normal? The question should have stung, but David heard the longing beneath it. She's 9 and obsessed with drawing. She talks to strangers at the grocery store and believes dogs can read minds. So no, not normal. Just herself. The corner of Sophie's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Over the following weeks, David settled into a rhythm. He'd finish his night shift at 6 a.m., sleep for 3 hours, then arrive at the penthouse by 10 a.m. He'd stay until 6 p.m., when the evening nurse took over, then rush home to have dinner with Dolly before starting his night shift again. It was exhausting. It was impossible. It became his life. Sophie, he learned, was brilliant. She'd finished high school online 2 years early, was auditing college courses in philosophy and art history, and could discuss Nietzsche and Renaissance painting with equal fluency. But her body, ravaged by years of illness and treatments, betrayed her sharp mind at every turn. Do you ever get tired of it? David asked one afternoon while helping her with physical therapy exercises. Of being sick? She stretched her arm, wincing. I don't remember not being sick. It's like asking if you get tired of breathing. That's not the same. Isn't it? She met his eyes. You work 2 jobs to keep Dolly safe. I work to keep my body functioning. We're both just surviving. David had no answer for that. But slowly, something shifted. Sophie started waiting by the window for him to arrive. She'd have coffee ready, the expensive kind Vivian kept stocked. She'd show him paintings she'd found online, asking his opinion with genuine curiosity. What do you see? She asked once, pulling up a Rothko on her tablet. David studied the blocks of color, burgundy and black. Loneliness, he said finally. The kind that doesn't need company to feel better, just needs to be seen. Sophie stared at him for a long moment. Mom was right about you. What did she say? That you notice things other people miss. David thought about the scar, the weariness, the way Vivian moved through the world like she was carrying invisible weight. Your mom carries a lot. She thinks I don't know, Sophie said quietly. How much the surgeries cost, how many deals she's made, how many pieces of herself she's sold to keep me alive. But I know. I've always known. Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. David recognized that practiced control. The armor of someone who'd learned early that vulnerability was dangerous. You know what Dolly told me once? David said. She said being sick isn't the worst thing. The worst thing is when people stop seeing you as anything else. Sophie looked out the window. Your daughter is wise. She gets it from her mother. Where is she? Dolly's mom? David was quiet for a moment. She left when Dolly was 2. Couldn't handle the medical bills, the constant worry. I don't blame her. This life isn't for everyone. But you stayed. Of course I stayed. Sophie smiled then, really smiled. Mom said that about you too, that you're the kind of man who stays. Meanwhile, Vivian appeared less frequently at the penthouse, usually late at night when she thought Sophie was asleep. But David saw her sometimes. Standing in the doorway of her daughter's room, watching with an expression that was equal parts love and devastation. One night, as he was leaving, they crossed paths in the elevator. She's doing better, David offered. Stronger. Vivian nodded, but didn't speak. In the enclosed space, he noticed the exhaustion carved into her face, the way her shoulders sagged when she thought no one was watching. You should talk to her more, he said carefully. She misses you. I see her every day. Being in the same room isn't the same as talking. Vivian's jaw tightened. You don't understand the pressure. The board is circling. There are rumors about my commitment, my focus. If they knew about Sophie, if they knew I took time for anything besides this company, they'd see you're human, David interrupted. Is that really so terrible? The elevator doors opened. Vivian stepped out, then turned back. You think it's that simple, she said softly. But everything I've built, everything I've sacrificed, it's all to protect her. If I show weakness now, I lose it all. And then what? Who takes care of Sophie when the money runs out and the insurance companies decide she's too expensive to keep alive? David had no answer, because he understood that fear intimately, lived it every day with Dolly. The doors closed between them, but her words lingered, heavy with truth. Yet beneath the surface of these careful routines and guarded conversations, something neither David nor Vivian had anticipated was taking root. Something that would force them to question every wall they'd built and every sacrifice they'd believed was necessary. And the first crack in those walls appeared on a rainy Thursday afternoon when Sophie asked David a question that would change everything. Are you my father? Sophie's voice cut through the silence of the penthouse like a blade. She sat in her wheelchair, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on David, with an intensity that made his blood run cold. David set down the book he'd been reading. What? Simple question, Sophie said, her voice trembling despite her attempt at control. Are you my biological father? Sophie, why would you? Because I found these. She pulled out a folder from beneath a blanket on her lap. Inside were documents, old emails, a photograph of Vivian from 18 years ago, younger, smiling, standing next to a man who looked nothing like David, but everything like the dreams he'd buried. That's not me, David said carefully. I know. Sophie's hands shook as she held up another document. This is a private investigator's report. Mom hired someone to track you down 5 years ago, right before you mysteriously got this job with perfect timing, perfect placement, perfect access to us. David felt the floor tilt beneath him. Sophie's voice cracked. The report says Mom knew someone named Reid in college. Mark Reid, your older brother. He died 15 years ago in a car accident. But before that, he and Mom were together. 9 months before I was born." The silence that followed was deafening. David sat slowly, his mind racing through memories he'd never properly examined. His brother Mark, brilliant and charming, who dated a business student named Vivian before everything fell apart. Mark, who died before David could ask him about the girl who kept calling his phone, voice desperate, asking if he'd told anyone, if he'd left anything behind. "I didn't know," David whispered. "Mark never told me." But Mom knew. Sophie's tears fell now, unchecked. "She knew you were his brother. She tracked you down, arranged for you to get this job, watched you for 5 years before staging that accident, where you saw her scar. It wasn't an accident at all. It was a test." David looked up sharply. "What?" The door to the penthouse opened. Vivian stood in the entrance, her face pale but composed. "Sophie," she said quietly, "that's enough." "Is it true?" Sophie demanded. "Did you manipulate him? Use him?" Vivian walked into the room with the careful steps of someone approaching a ledge. She looked at David, and in her eyes, he saw the answer before she spoke. "Yes." "Mark was Sophie's biological father," Vivian continued, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "We were together briefly in college. When I found out I was pregnant, he wanted nothing to do with it. Said he wasn't ready, that I should handle it alone. So I did." She sat down across from them, not in control now, but raw, exposed. "When Mark died, I felt guilty. I'd kept his daughter from him out of pride, out of hurt. Years later, when Sophie got sick, and I was drowning in medical bills and board meetings, and the crushing weight of doing everything alone, I hired an investigator to find out if Mark had any family left." Her eyes met David's. "I found you. Night janitor, single father, good man. You reminded me so much of what Mark could have been if he'd grown up. And I thought, if I couldn't give Sophie her father, maybe I could give her someone who understood what it meant to fight for your child." David felt sick. "So this entire time you've been testing me, auditioning me for the role of substitute father?" "No," Vivian said firmly. "At first, maybe. But watching you with Dolly, seeing how you worked 2 jobs and never complained, how you knocked on doors when you didn't have to, how you treated people with dignity regardless of their station, I realized I wasn't looking for Mark's replacement. I was looking for someone better." "You should have told me," David said, his voice tight with anger, and something deeper, something like betrayal. "I know. I had a right to know. You did. And Sophie, she deserved to know who her father was. She did." Vivian looked at her daughter, eyes brimming. "I made choices I thought would protect you, both of you. I was wrong." Sophie wiped her face with the back of her hand. "So what now? We all just pretend this is fine? That you didn't lie to us?" Vivian stood slowly. "No. Now I tell you the rest." She walked to the window, staring out at the city that had watched her rise and fall and rise again. "Mark didn't just refuse to be part of Sophie's life," she said quietly. "He threatened me. Said if I told anyone he was the father, he'd destroy my reputation, my future, everything I was building. He had connections, family money, lawyers. I was nobody." She turned back. "So I disappeared, changed cities, built this company from nothing, raised Sophie alone. And when she got sick, when I nearly lost her, I realized that all the money and power in the world meant nothing if I was still running from ghosts." Vivian looked at David. "Finding you wasn't about manipulation. It was about giving Sophie something I never had. A good man who knows what it means to sacrifice for someone you love. Someone who knocks." David stood, his legs unsteady. "I need air." He walked out, leaving mother and daughter in the wake of revelations that changed everything. But as he stood on the balcony 37 floors above the city, hands gripping the railing, David understood something that Vivian hadn't said, something that made his chest ache with impossible complexity. He'd fallen in love with them, both of them, not because of blood or duty, but because somewhere in the late-night conversations and the careful routines and the shared understanding of what it meant to fight for the people you loved, he'd found a family he never knew he needed. And now he had to decide if love built on partial truths could ever become something whole, or if some doors, once opened accidentally, should have remained forever closed. 3 days passed in silence. David returned to his regular janitorial shifts, moving through the 37th floor like he'd never stopped, like the past months had been a dream. He didn't go to the penthouse, didn't answer Vivian's calls, didn't respond to Sophie's texts that started angry, then hurt, then finally, heartbreakingly simple. "Please don't leave me too." Dolly noticed the change in him immediately. She watched him over breakfast with her 2 wise eyes, the way only children can. "Did someone hurt you, Dad?" David looked up from coffee he hadn't touched. "Why would you ask that?" "Because you have that look, the one you had after Mom left." He reached across the table, took her small hand in his calloused one. "Sometimes people keep secrets because they're scared. And sometimes those secrets hurt even when they weren't meant to. But you're still hurt." "Yeah, sweetheart. I am." Dolly squeezed his fingers. "You know what you always tell me. When I'm scared about being sick." David smiled despite the ache in his chest. "What's that?" "You say love isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up anyway." The words hit him like a punch to the sternum. That night, David stood outside the penthouse with his heart hammering. He used his key, the one Vivian had given him months ago, and stepped inside. Sophie sat by the window in her wheelchair. She didn't turn when he entered. "I'm sorry," David said to her back. "For what? Leaving? Or for making me think you were different? For not being brave enough to stay when things got complicated?" Sophie turned then, and her face was streaked with tears. "I don't care if you're not my biological father. I don't care if Mom manipulated you, or tested you, or whatever corporate strategy she was running. I just know that for the first time in my life, someone treated me like I was more than just my disease, more than just a liability." David crossed the room, knelt beside her wheelchair. "You are more. You're brilliant and sharp and kinder than you pretend to be. And none of that has anything to do with whose DNA you carry. Then why did you leave?" "Because I was afraid," David admitted. "Afraid that if I stayed, I'd love you both too much. And when the inevitable end came, when you realized you didn't need me anymore, it would break me. I've already been broken once, Sophie. I didn't think I could survive it again." Sophie reached out, placed her thin hand on his cheek. "You think love has to end? That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, and I've read Hegel." David laughed through the tightness in his throat. The elevator dinged. Vivian stepped into the penthouse, stopping short when she saw them. "David," she breathed. He stood, turned to face her. "I need you to promise me something. Anything. No more tests, no more secrets. If we do this, if we try to be whatever strange family we're becoming, it has to be real. Messy and imperfect and real." Vivian nodded, tears sliding down her face with surprising freedom. "I promise. And you have to let Sophie know you, not the CEO, not the perfect mother who sacrifices everything. Just you, scared and human and trying your best. I don't know if I remember how." Sophie spoke up quietly. "Then we'll figure it out together. All of us." David looked between them, these 2 women who had somehow become his world. "I'm still the janitor. I still work nights. I still have Dolly to take care of. And I'm still dying, Sophie said matter-of-factly. Slowly, but eventually. We can't pretend otherwise. I'm still terrified every day that I'll lose everything I've built, Vivian added. The company, my reputation. This fragile thing we're creating. David smiled. Then we're all disasters. The best kind, Sophie agreed. Over the following months, things didn't magically fix themselves. Sophie had bad days where the pain was too much, and she lashed out at everyone. Vivian still worked impossible hours, still struggled to balance the demands of running a company with being present. David still scrubbed floors and emptied trash, still worried about rent and Dolly's medication. But they showed up, every day, in whatever capacity they could. Dolly met Sophie on a Saturday afternoon. The two of them sat by the window, Dolly drawing, while Sophie critiqued with the gentle sarcasm of an older sister. Your proportions are off, Sophie said. His head is too big. That's Dad. His head is big. It's full of all his worry. Sophie laughed, really laughed. And the sound filled the penthouse like light. Vivian learned to leave work early sometimes. She'd arrive home to find David making dinner, while Sophie supervised from her wheelchair, the three of them arguing about seasoning and technique. She'd stand in the doorway, watching this impossible family she'd accidentally assembled, and feel something she'd forgotten existed. Peace. One night, as David prepared to leave for his shift, Vivian caught his hand. Thank you, she said, for opening the wrong door. David thought about that moment, months ago, when he'd knocked, and everything changed. Maybe it wasn't the wrong door. Maybe it was the only one that mattered. She kissed him then, soft and tentative, and he kissed back, tasting salt and hope. Sophie cleared her throat dramatically from across the room. If you two are going to be gross, at least wait until I'm not dying in front of you. They broke apart, laughing. You're not dying today, David said. No, Sophie agreed. Not today. And that became their promise. Not today. Not while they still had each other, still had this strange grace of accident and intention twisted together. Because sometimes the wrong door leads you exactly where you need to be. Sometimes secrets, when finally spoken, become bridges instead of walls. And sometimes love isn't about perfect timing or biological connections or strategic plans. Sometimes love is just a man who knocks, a woman who finally opens, and a girl who teaches them both that showing up, imperfect and afraid, is the bravest thing anyone can do. David never stopped being a janitor, but he stopped being invisible. And in the end, that made all the difference. If this story touched something in you, hit that like button and share it with someone you want to hear with. Subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss another story.